Welcome. This video is going to cover the install of ArchivesSpace product onto a server 2019. I did a similar video using Ubuntu, and this one is going to cover the Windows platform. The purpose of this is because the application doesn't have step-by-step linear type of instructions, and there are some bugs as you go through. And most of the instructions that we find on the ArchivesSpace and the related groups is related to Server 2008, which is rather old. So I wanted to do it on the latest operating system from Microsoft and make sure we can get it to work, and we did just that. Today on the left-hand side you'll see a script. That script will be posted on the YouTube video at the bottom as a link to the GitHub so you can download the text and copy and paste. We're going to go under the application on archivespace.org. Remember that it's archives, plural, space.org. So we're going to go to download the latest release here, and it takes us to their GitHub site, and all we have to do is scroll to the bottom and download this zip file, which I did. So we already have that completed. We're going to also need a copy of Windows. So if you go to Microsoft.com, you can get a trial copy. If you have an ISO, that's great. If you go to Microsoft.com and you just search for Server 2019 and click on the first link, which is the Microsoft.com, and it's the Windows-Server page. Here you can click on Try Now and sign up for a download free trial for on-premise. And you can actually get a copy of the ISO file. Let this load. You can see we select ISO, we hit continue, we'd have to sign up, give it some information, and then you can download the ISO. I already have the ISO, so I will minimize that or get rid of that one out of our way. The next thing we need is two things from MySQL. This is going to be the database that stores the data for the ArchivesSpace application. The ArchivesSpace application is more of a web page and some Java. The data is stored in the MySQL database. So we go to mysql.com and we click on downloads, and they hide the community edition in this link at the bottom here. It's not hidden, but it's just not as obvious as these other ones. So we'll click on that, and from here we have two things to download. We're going to download the installer for Windows, and you're going to grab the 435.4 meg one, which is the MSI file. That is offline installer, and we download that, which I've done already. Then if I go back one page, though that installer for Windows has all the connectors and things in it, we need a Java connector in a jar file format to drop into the folder where we're going to put ArchivesSpace. So I go to connector J, and don't pay attention to this icon here. It's going to remind you to download the installer, which we just did. But rather than that, drop this down. Don't select Microsoft Windows. Select Platform Independent. That will give you the jar file options. And we're going to take the second option here, which is a zip file. And we're going to download that 4.6 meg file. And we'll use that file later on. So I've already done that as well. And that's all we need off the MySQL page. Now today I'm going to be building our Windows 2019 server virtually on a virtual machine, which most servers today are built that way. And I'm using my Macintosh to do this exercise as a lab. So if you're using a PC or a laptop and you're using Macintosh or Windows, VMware is a great platform. They have workstation level virtualization products. The one for the Mac is called Fusion. Cost a little over $100, $150. It's a great product. The one for Windows is called VMware Workstation Pro. And that one is also about the same price. And they're nice, and they'll help us build virtual machines. Now, if you don't want to pay that, they have a VMware Workstation Player, which is free, does everything you're going to need it to do to run this program. Now, those are what we call Class 2 hypervisors. That means they run on an operating system on a laptop or PC. For a production world, I'd be building this on a VMware vCenter/ESXi platform, which we're not going to cover here and talk about. But you can build it on that type of platform. It works just great. That's a fabulous platform. So if you're interested in using VMware to build your test box and you need a copy of Fusion, you just go to VMware.com, go to Resources, and then we can go to Product Downloads. I'll go to Products A through Z, and then I can scroll down, and at the beginning here I'll find VMware Fusion. This one is for Mac, and you can see you can download this. And then at the bottom here we can find the two versions for Windows. The Pro, which is the paid product, and the Player, which is a fabulous product as well, that will do everything you need for free. If you're going to download the free or you're going to buy one of these, you do have to set up an account here. The accounts are free, and if you want the workstation player for free, just set up the account, download it, and install it. So I'm going to close that. We're done with VMware because I already have mine installed and ready to go. I use it every day. The next thing we're going to need to download is an old version of Java. And as we all know, everyone in the world is trying to get rid of Flash in Java for security reasons. That's great. However, everybody else that runs their management platforms and things and interfaces off of Java and Flash don't move as fast as these organizations have tried to kill it. So you can still download Java in all the old versions if you set up an account as a developer. So to get the old versions, you simply go to oracle.com/java/technologies and then to the web page oracle-java-archive-downloads.html. This will be in the text so you don't have to figure it out, but you can search on a search engine for it and find it. The way this is listed is they provide you a category version to go to. We're using 1.8, which 1.8 means Java 8. So we're going to be using one of these two links. I'm going to go to the very first version of Java 8 under the Java SE. So I'm going to click this first link here, and it'll take me to all the Java 8 versions that are at that level or older. And if I scroll all the way down here on the bottom, I will get to the earliest versions. So I'm looking for, these are all GZ files. I'm going to go to, I want a zip file. So here's the first version of a file that's a exe. I'm sorry, I said zip, I meant exe. And this is the one we want. It's 32.54 megs, and we can download it. If you go to download it and you don't have an account, it will prompt you to create one. And you just say, yeah, I'm a developer, and here's my information, and then they'll let you download it. And I've already downloaded that as well. So we'll close the Java archive. We also need something from Apache, and this is proc run type of utilities. These are going to allow us to take what's traditionally a Linux-based application and create executables in Windows that allows it to run as a service. There's two files we need out of that proc run repository. To get those, we simply go to this website here, into the commons, into the daemon, into the binaries, into the Windows. And that link will also be in the text, and you will see three links here. And you want the first one, which is just the zip file. It's about 159K. And I've already downloaded that as well. So we have all those files, and we're ready to get started for the install of ArchiveSpace. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to bring up my VMware environment. And this is my VMware library. As you can see, as I mentioned, I do use it for a lot. So I'm actually have a lot of virtual machines on this platform, but we're going to make a new one here. The Windows version of this does the same things. The interface might look a little different. To install the Windows platform here, we have to know where our CD is. I already know where mine is, so download that ISO somewhere where you happen to know where it is. And then I'm just going to go up and make a new virtual machine. And this is the wizard that's going to walk us through it. I'm going to click on install from disk image because I have the disk image, and this will kind of answer some questions for the VMware platform for us. And I'll scroll to the bottom here because I already used it. But if I didn't, I would click here and navigate to that ISO file. So I'll highlight that and go next. They have an easy install on the Mac version. I believe they also have it on the Windows. I don't use it. It answers questions for me that I don't necessarily want them to do. I want to do the install myself. I'll hit continue, continue. And instead of hitting finish, I'm going to hit customize, which does a finish. But finish would actually finish and start booting the machine. Customize does a finish and lets me tweak the settings and start the machine manually, which is what I want to do. So I'm going to click on customize settings. Before I can customize it, it wants me to save it. So we'll call this ArchivesSpace. I'm going to call it 19 just because it's 2019, so I know which one it is. I might have one lingering in there by the regular name. And you can call that whatever you want. By the way, that's the name of the virtual machine's object. It is not the name of the operating system inside of it. So be aware, you have to name the machine within Windows to whatever you want it to be. And I'll show you when we do that. As you can see, the customization came up, allows me to change the settings. Now remember, I'm using a desktop-based virtualization tool, so it's going to try to do some things that make it easy to use on a desktop. And it's going to give me things like my camera, my sound card, things that I don't need. So Let's go through these. I'm going to remove the things I don't want. General is fine. Sharing, I don't want this enabled. It's already disabled. Default applications, I don't want this enabled. Just one note, some of these things I'm turning off, they won't be on the enterprise level ESXi and vCenter. I'll let you know which ones apply to both. So we turn this off. This setting, we're going to change the memory to 8192. That's 8 gigs of RAM. You can choose what you want to use. You would do this on any platform, the enterprise level and the desktop level. We'll leave it at 2 processors. The networking on the enterprise products will automatically be bridged. On the desktop products, you have to change it to bridged. Bridged means give the VM a network card like it had its own separate network card. Don't hide it behind my Mac like a program accessing the network. And that's the way we want it. So on the hard drive, I'm just going to check. If it doesn't come up to the size you want it, you can change it here. I'm not really putting data on this today, so I'm going to leave it here. But if you knew how much data you were going to use, you would want to modify this to something reasonable. On the CD-ROM, it should already have set the parameters, and it did. I just come in and checked that the ISO is set correctly, and it is set to connect on boot here. That's the only way I can get it to boot this and install Windows. If this was not checked, it will not boot that CD-ROM or DVD. We're going to remove the sound card. I really don't need it. Not on a server. And the printer, I don't need it to map. This is another one that has to do with it being a desktop virtualization. And I don't need a camera on it either. So before you see my face, I will remove it. The startup disk, we'll click and make sure it boots off the CD-ROM, or at least tries to. And then one last thing that you can choose. If I'm building this on my Fusion, which is my Mac, and I intend to export it and move it to ESXi in a production environment, I probably want to check the compatibility. This little tool lets you drop down to different versions and see if you change the versions, what is it compatible with on the left-hand side, and what is its limits on the right-hand side. So if I wanted to move this to somebody, let's say that has a 6.7 or a 7.0 ESXi host, I would have to go to at least down to 15, and those two are selectable here. So it will make the hardware, the fake hardware of a virtual machine, compatible with these products. I think I'll leave it like that just in case I want to move this one. Performance-wise, for this particular product, doesn't have that much impact. Every time VMware makes a new version, they improve the way you do things. But it doesn't really impact us all that much. This is a pretty low requirement app, which is nice. So that's all I have to do. I'm going to close that, and we're going to take our virtual machine here. I'll minimize this out of the way. Okay, we're going to boot this machine up, this virtual machine, and the way these server DVDs work is in Windows, you have to hit any key to tell it to boot from the CD-ROM when it tries to boot from the CD-ROM, and I usually use the space bar. In order to do that, I've got to get the control into this window so my keyboards affect this window and not my Mac. And the way you do that is once I click this, I'm just going to click right here, click in, and hit my space bar. It's actually quite easy. Click here. When it starts, I'll click in, and I'll hit my space bar. And there you can see I've got the thing booting off the ISO DVD, and we will now install Windows 2019. So I'm going to accept that for my language and click install, and it should load the wizard and ask us a few questions. The first version it selects by default is not the one you want if you want a mouse and you want to click things. You want the desktop experience. So I'm going to go to that. And then I'm going to accept this. And for some reason it dumbs itself down to upgrade. I don't understand that, but you have to click the second one and click next. And then we'll let it copy. I'll pause this and come back to it once it's done. All right, so it finished the files. It's finished installing the features. It's installing updates, and it'll finish up and reboot on its own. What we're going to have to do is remove or disconnect the CD-ROM once it's done. And that's under here, under the gear on Fusion. And I'll go ahead and do that now. Click here, and I'll just disconnect it. And we'll let that reboot. We got a couple things to do here in step one. Mainly set the time zone and install something called VMware Tools. VMware Tools do a lot of things other than just make your screen look better and make your mouse work better. It actually has an effect on memory and monitoring and heart beating and all sorts of stuff. So we definitely want to do that. Keep in mind on Ubuntu and Linux, VMware wants you to use the open source open VM tools, but on Windows, VMware wants you to use their tools and install them from their programs, and it's pretty easy to install. When we install VMware tools, we're just going to take the defaults. This way we don't end up with software on it that aren't appropriate for the hardware or the operating system. So there's only one thing for us to do to complete this, and that's to set a password for us. I'm going to set something easy just because this is a demo. And I'll hit finish. And our 19 is installed. Let me go ahead and log in. Now, a couple of things you would do for a real server. I'm going to show you. First of all, let's get the time zone correct. Very important. I'm going to say yes to that discovery because that's basically going to enable the network card to use the network for Microsoft-y type things, but that just popped up. If it does, just say yes to it. And I'm going to change my time zone to where I happen to live, which is the Eastern Standard Time Zone. And that's about all I need to do there. This Server Manager dashboard will pop up all the time, and it pops up with this new alert about using the Admin Center. I'm just going to tell it, don't show that to me, and close it so we have a nice clean screen to work with. And the next step here is to install VMware Tools. So I'm going to go up to my menu and select Install VMware Tools. On some platforms, it's menu, it's guest Install VMware Tools. And it's pretty easy to find instructions on that. We just install it. It takes the VMware Tools software and mounts it to this machine as though it was a CD-ROM, and you'll see it pop up here, and there it is. We click on it and run the setup. And again, it's one of the few things in my life that I do take the defaults on and take the typical install. It will do two things. It will actually make my graphics card much better. Unfortunately, it's now trying to leverage 100% of my screen of my Retina display on my Mac. So I'm going to turn that off real quick. That's just a goofiness with my Mac. And it will require a reboot, which we will let it do. One thing you might want to do as you build this server is you might want to set a static IP, which is great for a server. You don't want the IPs to change. And you might want to change its name. Fortunately, it's fairly easy to do. If we go into the control panel here, and I type network, if I can type it, and you look for view network connections and click on it, this is the network card, and you can right click it and go to properties. Navigate to IP protocol version 4, click it and go to properties, and you can static in your IP addresses and things like that. Servers aren't meant to move. DHCP and dynamic IPs means that every day your laptop might have a different address. Well, we don't want servers to do that, so that's why we would set a static. Exactly what IP you would use is dependent on your network and what scheme you've used and what's available and not already in use. And you would set your IP here, your mask here, your gateway here, which tells it where to go when it needs to get off net, and your DNS servers. The DNS servers you would use can be public ones unless you're intending to join a domain or use an internal resource that relies on DNS working. So if you're joining an Active Directory domain, these are probably going to be DNS servers for your domain only. You don't want to mix public and privates here, or you'll break the Microsoft platform. After you set that, then this machine will stay on that IP address permanently. The other thing you can do, and I'm under the control panel, if you just go into System, actually I have to click on here and type System, is I'm going to click right on the word System. You see my computer name is randomly generated and I'm not in my domain. So after setting my static IP and making sure my DNSs are correct, I would hit change settings right here, change right here, and maybe I'm going to call this PHL Archive 1. And then I'm going to join the domain of whatever your domain is inside, my domain.local. And I would then hit OK. It would prompt me for credentials to join this to the domain. I have to use credentials that are in that domain. And then it would create a computer account, and this computer would be rejoined to the domain, and it would reboot. Now, a couple notes about domain joining. If you are going to make this a domain server and you're joining your domain, you want to do that early on and then do the rest of the installation. If you have any issues that look like they're oddities compared to what we went through in this video, then you may choose to try to install it without it being in a domain first and see if that works. If that works, then it's likely that something in your domain is pushing some security or policy onto your machine through a product called group policy, and it is putting restrictions on your machine that are prohibiting either the install to work or the application to run. So your second way of getting around that would be install it while it's not a domain member and join it to the domain after the fact, reboot it, and see if your app now works. If it does not work, then you still might have some troubleshooting to do in your Active Directory. But I wanted to show you that and throw that in there to let you guys know how we went through the process of diagnosing this. Now you don't have to do what I'm going to do here. In between step 1 and 2, I'm going to take all the files we downloaded and I'm going to copy them to my desktop to make my lab faster. Okay, that took a little while. It kind of hung there for a little bit, but it caught up. I have all my software here downloaded. Now let's go on to step number 2, which is to run the Java install. I'm just going to double click it. And I'll hit close. Now the Java, you probably want to make sure this doesn't update beyond 1.8. So you might play around with those settings. I'll show you where those are. For my lab, I'm going to turn off updates. So it was that easy to install Java. We need to know a couple things about Java. Basically, it's going to have a path stored in the control panel. We need that path for our lab. I'll show you where to find it. If you just go into the control panel here, and there's lots of ways to get to it. I'm just going to do one, which is type Java and click on the icon that appears. We'll get the Java applet, and we'll go to a couple things. Number one, as I told you, I'm going to go to update and just turn this off for now. But we're going to need for the install, under the Java tab, under View, this path. And you can see it's in the program files, and you can see it's in the Java folder, and a JRE folder is actually where it's installed. And its executables are in a folder called bin. We actually don't need the name of the executable. We just need this entire path. So I'm going to kind of copy that. Control C. And I'll cancel and cancel. Nothing else to do there. So while we're in here, we'll move on to step 3, which is managing variables and paths. So under here, instead of Java, I'm going to type system and click the first option under system, edit the system variables. And we have the system variables, system properties. Under here, we have a button called environmental variables. That's what we want. And here you get a 2-pane screen. The top applies to an individual user. We don't want that. We want to do everything in the bottom half that applies to the entire machine. The first thing we're going to do is add a new variable. Again, this is in step number 3 of the instructions, called Java home, all underscored and capped. And this should point to the home directory of Java, which is that much. And we hit OK. So now we have Java home pointing to the JRE folder, that's where Java 8 is installed. The next thing we need to do is modify path. Now, one of the other videos out there, the guy did a great job on 2008, but he accidentally in the video overwrote this entire line, it looked like, with the Java. Let me explain to you what the path does. When you type a command in or you try to run a command, the default practice of Windows is to try to find an executable that matches what you typed with the .com, .exe, or .bat or similar .command file and run it in the folder that you ran it from. If it doesn't find it in that folder, it will then search through every path in this, folder path in this path statement. And the folder paths are separated by a semicolon. So it's C Windows System 32 semicolon. The next entry is C Windows. The next entry is C, and etc. So if you're on an older OS, you have to add a semicolon and add what we're going to do on the end. If you're on 2019, you just click edit on that and it'll let you add a new line. You paste it in, and this is where the executables are, so you want to include the bin like that. So it knows that's where all the executables for Java are. And it's that simple. We hit it like that and it'll be on this line on the end. So I'm going to hit OK. That's all we have to do for that. When you change the system variables, we do need to reboot, so I'll do that. I'm going to open a command prompt by clicking the Windows button and typing CMD and then selecting the desktop app. and I'm going to type set. Now set will show you every variable if you see. I'll clear that. I'm going to do set, but I'm going to pipe it, means send it to the find command. And in the find command, I'm going to search for the word Java. Because I don't know the case or upper or lowercase, I'm going to do /I, which means give it to me with any case. So it's going to do the set command and only look for lines that contain the word Java in any case. And I'll hit enter. And here we find our Java home, correctly set to the install directory. And here we find the path statement. Java is in the path statement right here. So that's good. We validated that works well. And we're going to go on to the next part, which is the step 4, the prerequisites in Windows. So a couple things in here. We got to make sure .NET is installed. By the way, it is by default, so if you skip this step, you don't need to worry about it. But to show you how to get there, I'm just going to go to the server manager by clicking the Windows button and starting to type server, and then clicking the desktop app. It's that same app that came up every time we logged in. Under here, there's a couple ways to do it. You can go to local server here and scroll down till you find the features, because .NET is a feature, and you'll find it in this list. And that's probably good enough. If you wanted to do it another way, you could go to add roles and features. Just next, next, next. This is the roles. We aren't adding those. It's a feature. It's on the next page. And you can see on the next page it's selected, but it's not all selected. So we just open this up to make sure that the .NET Framework 4.7 is actually installed, and that's all we need to do. If it wasn't, you'd check it and roll through the rest of this wizard, but I'm going to cancel that. So we've validated that the .NET is there. So you don't need to try to push and follow the instructions for 2008 or something older and try to get an older version of .NET on here. .NET 4.7 will work just fine. The next thing we need to do is we need to manage the firewall. Now I'm going to click on here. I'm going to go into Control Panel. And Windows has a built-in firewall. I'm just going to type firewall here and select on Windows Defender Firewall right on the heading. And you can see the firewall is on. And I can tell by these two things that it's on because it's green. For this install, I don't recommend leaving it on. I recommend turning it off. And then if you want it enabled, you can then set up the firewall using this, allow an app or a feature through the Windows to firewall, and you can configure it and then turn it back on. I just found a lot of problems if it's not on while the install is going. It can cause some things not to happen, and it's nearly impossible to pick it apart and find out what it did. So we're just going to click down here, turn it on or off, turn it off in both cases, and hit OK. And we've gotten through the prerequisites for Windows 2019, and now we're on to the product pieces. Okay, so the next step is to install the MySQL database. MySQL is the database that's going to store the data for the application. So I'm just going to go into my downloaded folder here, and I will right-click and install it, or you could double-click and install it. You have a couple options. The main one you need to do is just server only. We don't need all the other things. If you're a GUI-driven person, you like clicking on stuff, and you want the workbench, which helps you manage the database by clicking on stuff, you could do custom. Go next, and then you could click under here, and you have to at least add this in. That's the database. And then you could go under applications and take the workbench and add that in. I wouldn't necessarily install all the stuff on a server, but for us, I'm going to go back one level. I'm just going to do the server only because that's really all you need. You should be installing Workbench and some of those other tools on your laptop, not on the server itself. I'll go next and execute. We'll let that finish. It goes really fast. You can see the details here if you need to, and you can watch what it was doing. I'll go next, and it wants to configure it. I will leave the defaults. We'll check that port 3306 is listening once we're done. Here is one of the things we're going to change to legacy. This does dumb down a little bit of the security, but I found that the ArchivesSpace product is written mainly with MySQL 5 in mind. As a matter of fact, the videos that show it, they're all installing MySQL 5. So I had trouble getting it to work with this password encryption piece. Didn't spend too much time with it. I just dumbed it down to this, and that solved the problem. So I'll go next. I got to put a password in for the root user. I'll keep the defaults on this, which should start the service. and I will execute it, and we can actually watch here. You can also watch the log as it goes through things, and it starts up the services, but this doesn't take very long at all. And we're done. I'll hit finish, next, and finish, and MySQL is installed. We will validate that by doing a couple things. If I click on this, I'm going to go and find the MySQL 8 command line client. It's under recently added. It's also under here, and we can click on this one that says command line client, and you can validate it by logging into here, putting my password in, and I'll get out of that. You can also validate it, and you should validate it by doing a netstat -an and searching for, well, I don't have to search for anything right now. We'll just do that. Now, netstat, what it is a network command to show us connections. The A allows it to show us all listening connections, because on a server, you have a lot of listening connections that you're hosting resources on. Without the A, it will only show you things that are actually live connections. But that doesn't really help us on a server. We're interested that the server has a service running, listening, waiting for clients to connect to it. And you can see all the outputs there. Now, I just want the TCP one, so I'm going to add a -p and type TCP, and it's only going to give me the TCP outputs because our 3306 is being hosted as a TCP port. And you can see the status is listing, and that's what we're looking for. I'm going to close out of this, and we're going to configure the database, create a user in the database, and give it privileges in the database, and finish the MySQL setup to store the data for this product. So again, I'm going to click here and go to the SQL command line client, log in, and then I'm going to copy out of my text pad. This creates a database named ArchivesSpace with a default character set of UTF-8 MB4, which is required for their product. And if you get the query okay, you're good to go. I can actually, should just type that, but show databases and validate that that did just make the database. Create user, and the name of the user is AS on the local machine, the local host, and identify it with this password AS123. And I must have grabbed 2 lines at once, which is what it looks like I did. And the last command here is grant all privileges on the database ArchivesSpace.anything to the user AS on this local host, and that's good. So I'm done. Now, there was one bug in there we found, and I did a little reading on this, and it does add a setting that some people consider to lower security a little bit. You can do your reading and Googling on it if you like. Set global, then the log _bin _trust _function _creators equals 1. And this will be in the text as well. And that kind of resolved the issue. We are now done with the SQL database. The SQL database is installed, database created, user created, permissions created. The first thing we're going to do is take the downloaded 2.8 and extract it. I'm going to be storing this right on the root of C. So you would actually right click and extract all. Change this to just C:\/ and hit extract. Now it does take a while. So to help out the video here, I've already extracted them, and I'm just going to move this extracted version to the C drive. And you'll end up, after extracting them, with this type of setup. The archive space here and a bunch of folders underneath. Next step we do is number 8, which is to install the Java connector for MySQL. I'll put this on the left-hand side. And we downloaded that one from MySQL, and it's in here, in this zip file. And what this does, I'm going to double-click on it, open the folder, and there's the jar file I need. Now, you can't see that's a jar file, so what I might do is turn on your ability to see known file extensions. So now we can see it's a jar file. This is the connector that helps the application access a MySQL database using Java. We need to put that under this lib folder here, and you'll see all the other jar files here. So all I do is drag it into there. And it's that easy. That's done. Step 8, done. The next thing we're going to do is modify some folders. Actually, technically files. So I'm going to go back here to the ArchiveSpace folder, and we're going to be modifying a file in config. It's the only file in config called config.rb, and this is the main configuration for the database. I'm going to right click and say open with, try an app on this PC and select Notepad and hit OK. It's a text file. Now what we're going to be modifying first is right down towards the beginning, about line 15 or so. You'll see this app config database URL, and this one actually is correct, but we're not going to use that one because I don't feel like checking it. I'm going to use the one I saved in my text file, paste it on a new line, make sure there's not a hash in front of it. Hash is a remark, means it won't read that line in most cases. And our line basically says app config the database URL, the way to connect to the database. We're using the JDBC, the Java MySQL connector, to this local machine on port 3306. We saw that listening to the ArchiveSpace database, which we created using the user AS, which we created using the password. And again, if you modified the password you used for your MySQL database user, you want to modify it there. And use the base encoding character format, character encoding of UTF-8. So that's how the application is going to read this and know how to connect to the database. There is two other changes to make in this file. I'm going to do a Control F and search for Jetty. And when I find it, I'll scroll down just a little bit more till I see the app config lines below the description section. And I want to remark these out. Unremark them so they're not remarked out. These two app configs. I want these to execute. And I also want to change the handler to true. And that's it. That's all we have to do for this config.rb. I can close this now and save it. And my configuration is done. We're done step 8. Let's go on now to actually setting up the database. So everything we have done up to this point will allow ArchiveSpace to run and to access the database. So our next step is to run a script that's going to make the connection using the user into the database and create all the tables, all the fields, all the indexes, all the values that we need in that to store data for our application. And this one works pretty well as long as you remember one thing: to run it, the command prompt, as an administrator. To do that, I'm going to click on Start, typing CMD. I'm going to right click on this and run it as administrator. I'm going to CD to the C:\ArchiveSpace directory and into the subdirectory scripts and hit enter. In here, there is a setup database.bat file. I just simply type that and run it. And I should get no errors if my connections are all good and my password's accurate. You'll know if it starts to work if you start to see the applying migration versions directions up. And there you go. End of step 10. And I'll close this window. I do close the window at the end of each step in these instructions because some of them you do not want to run as an administrative command prompt. So I'll tell you each time to open it. So for step 11, we're just going to open another command prompt. And we are going to go into CD C:\ArchiveSpace into the root of this drive. And if I do a dir, you'll see there's a bat file in here. That is to start the program manually. And we're going to do that first. Do not skip any of the test steps. They do something, I'm not sure what, but if you skip them, I notice that the service will not run correctly. So we're going to test first and run this ArchiveSpace.bat. It will load Java, and then it will start writing to the ArchiveSpace out log, anything that happens or needs to be logged there. And that's about where you're going to stop. So I'm going to have to open another command prompt here by right-clicking on this and selecting command prompt. And now I'm going to do the netstat command. And I will do a -an to get everything and the numeric value. I will do a protocol TCP, and I will pipe all of that to a find. And I'm just going to look for the number 80. Because I know all the ports that it listens on start 80 something something, 8080 up through 809 something. So you can see a lot of ports are starting up here. In some cases, the computer is connected to itself doing things. The main file I'm looking for here as we wait is 8080. Now I'll tell you, it pops up, disappears, and pops up again. So you want to give this an actual full 2 minutes to start. And I'm actually going to pause the screen for 2 full minutes and not make the assumption it's starting any faster than that. 2 minutes went by. Let's just see what happened. And you can see I have a whole bunch of new ports open. Mainly my 8080 is there. And I'm going to test it. Now I don't test it from the server itself because it has IE, an old version, and it doesn't like that. You got to use a relatively newer browser. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do an IP config and find out what my IP address is. My IP is 192.168.250.113. I'm going to open a browser and we will open a new tab, and I will go to HTTP 192.168.250.113. Colon means I'm going to add a port number that's not the standard, because the standard for HTTP is port 80. We're going to port 8080. I'm going to try to log in here. The default is admin. I'll sign in. If I sign in, your application's working and our data is being stored in MySQL. Really nice. Now, if you happen to go under here and you do something like, I want to see my user preferences, you'll get errors, okay? And that's expected. You're going to, the user, the admin of this software, this archive software, following their instructions, which I'm not covering in this, would have to make a repository first. And I will show you. We're going to make a repository. I'm going to call this Tim's Repo. And I think that's about all I need to do. And I will save repository 1. And once you do that, all the other kind of fields will work. Like if I go to, let's see here, global preferences, I can now get to user preferences. So there's something that needs to be there first to link up the tables. So always, let the administrator make their repository before you start troubleshooting any of that stuff. I am going to be sure to log out of that. And we're going to go back to our virtual machine now. We are going to go back into the command prompt that has that ArchivesSpace.bat file running, and to stop a batch file, we hit Control-C. It'll ask us, do you want to terminate? And I will give it a yes and hit enter. And now that service has shut down, or actually is shutting down. Technically, it shut down, but the connections don't time out right away. Let me show you. You see all the timeout waits? So before you proceed, I recommend you wait till all these timeout, which take about 2.5 minutes, and I'm going to pause for that. Let's see how we're doing here, and it looks like they're all gone. So at this point, what we're up to is a point where we have the application that works. You just have to start it manually. And the next step is the process where we want to set it up as a service, and this is where I think the most problems come in on 2019 that have not really been addressed too well. If you run into a problem, rather than start all over, I'm going to use a feature of VMware called snapshots. Now keep in mind, when you take a snapshot, it will roll back to exactly where this is. And when you roll back to here, the only thing that will change is it'll look at the time and say, oh, whoa, where'd the time go? And it'll fix the time. So we're going to take a snapshot in the VMware Fusion. You click this button. In the workstation, there's another button. And I'm just going to say take a snapshot, and I'll call this prior to installing ArchiveSpace as a service. And I will take it. I'll let it finish, and there you go. All right, that gives us a rollback capability. If we need to roll back, we'll right-click and restore. And when we do, it'll ask us, do we want to save this one? We'll say no. And that'll bring us right back to here. When you're ultimately done and everything's working well, make sure you come back and delete the snapshot. It really has no negative impact on the running machine, doesn't delete anything, but you don't want to leave snapshots lying around. They have actually a negative impact on performance. So that we're there, let's go ahead and install executables required to create services. This is our Apache download. So what I'm going to do is open our ArchiveSpace folder. This is going into the root. So we'll put this over here. And then we need our downloads folder. And I'll put that over here. So the file we downloaded from Apache was the daemon here, the commons daemon, and inside there are two files. One of these is a monitoring service, one of these is an executable to make services. So we're going to put them right into the root of the ArchiveSpace. And I'm going to leave this here because basically the setup script, we're going to be running a launcher in here that sets up service. And what it's going to do is it's going to copy these and make new files from them that are going to be used for our services. So in this one, I'm going to run a command prompt as an administrator. Go into the ArchiveSpace folder. Move into the launcher subfolder and run the service.bat file. Read the instructions, make sure you did your prerequisites, you got the proc run files from Apache, and that you have the Java home set. And then we just finish the install by hitting any key, and it says it's completed. I'll exit out of this, and you can see it's copied these files and made our executables. It's also made a service within Windows and a registry entry for that service inside the registry. Now that we have that service created, let's go ahead and make some modifications. The first thing we're going to do before we try to start the service is we're going to go and click on Start and type Services. And you can see the desktop app there. And we will see the new service that it created. What we want to do with this is before we start this, we just want to modify it by double-clicking it and going to Recovery and setting the Restart Services for first, second, and third failure to restart the service. We found this deals with some issues with different speed 2019 machines, depending on how fast or how slow it mounts the SQL database. So we're done with this app. We're not going to actually start it there. We're going to open a command prompt. So I'm going to click Start and type CMD, right-click and open as administrator, and I will move into the ArchiveSpace folder. And this is where our executable is, and I'm going to grab a little command here off my text pad. And we're going to run the command here, ArchivesSpace service W. Make sure you do the W.exe with the //es// which will bring up the GUI window. And there's a couple things we need to modify on here before we start it. And that is just verify that this is set to local service account. The logging, just verify that everything's set here. It should be. The Java will need one modification, and that is to point the Java virtual machine to a jvm.dll. So we click the ellipsis and go into C, Program Files, Java, JRE, bin, Server. Yours might be under Server or Client, and select the DLL, and that's there. And then I'm going to go to Startup, and you have to have the working path set. So I'm going to hit the ellipsis, open this, and point it at ArchiveSpace folder so that that's set. I'm going to hit Apply. It's important that you apply it. And then go back to General and try to start it. Now in testing, this worked every time, the exact way that I did it. If you modify one thing, you don't open a command prompt as admin, whatever it is, can make that go haywire. And I didn't really have the time to debug it all. But you can see our service is started. I'm going to just do our netstat and look for port 808, well, just 80. And we can see it is starting, so I'm going to let it start up, and I'm going to test to make sure it works. But we did notice that there were a lot of issues with getting this to start correctly. I'm going to give you a couple tips here. There's another way to start this, which would be to do this with the service, and you do //ts//. That will start a service, name this, and it'll start in the console window here. You can try a couple of those if your service doesn't start. You can also go into the Windows Services applet that we were in before, and you can try to start it here. And you can just switch back and forth between windows until it starts. Once it seems to start the first time and you log into it, it seems to, when you reboot the Windows server, it will start every time. So we're going to just sit here and wait for this. I'm going to search again for this and see that we got our 8080, and there it is. And I'm going to go ahead and open a Safari window. Now, the time since I've recorded this, my IP changed. So let me go ahead and find out what my new IP is. I had to re-record the ending of this video, so I'm now on 117. So I will go to HTTP 192.168.250.117. And by the way, that was just because I recorded part of this one day and part of it another day, that my DHCP changed my IP address. That's one of the reasons back in the section when we talked at the beginning about setting a static IP, it's a good idea to do that so that your server never moves. I'll log in. So even if it was a cache page, if I log in and I log in correctly and I can see Tim's repo, which I can, then we know that we're actually looking at the database. And we can see that I'm looking at the database here. So I'm going to log out. We have one more thing to do, step 15. And step 15 is to take this environment, and I will hit OK here, and I will close this. And the purpose of a server is to boot with no human intervention and come up with your services. So we're going to try that. I'm going to simply do this and shut this down and restart it. And then I will give it a full 3 to 5 minutes to reboot and for those services to start. It usually takes at least 3 minutes for that to work. Sometimes less, but most of the time, if you take 3 minutes, it'll work. I'm going to pause this while we wait 3 minutes. A few minutes, I didn't try to shortcut it. And I did. I'm going to close this and let's open a new tab and open it again so we're not using the same one. Hit enter, log in. I'm just going to refresh that, make sure it's not cached. It doesn't seem to be. Again, if it's cached and you log in, you're not going to get logged in. So, and there I'm logged in. I'm back in Tim's repo. And everything's working, and the server came up completely on its own. So hopefully that helps you out, and I hope that helps somebody out there who's going through frustrations of getting this to work. And if you have any comments, please add them up to the YouTube, but be courteous to others and make them positive. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.